Hello, and welcome to It's All a Little Weird, the podcast where we delve into cryptozoology, UFOs, ghosts and ghouls, and just general weird going-ons. If you find yourself enjoying this video at any point, or this podcast, please do me a favour and hit that like button. And also, if you're new around here, subscribe for more like this every single week. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the legend that is Bigfoot. Now, this is one of them strange ones because when I say that I believe in some and don't in others, this is one that really piques my interest. This is one that I could really sink my teeth into and actually believe. If you've already seen the video of the big cats that are in England, then this just goes to show that some ecosystems are able to sustain something of this size. And whether we talk about Bigfoot, Yetis, abominable snowmen, or even Harry and the Hendersons, this could be one of those that is truly real. So buckle yourself in, get yourself ready. I've got some facts, I've got some figures, I've got some bits and pieces, and I've also got some evidence. So let's get into this one. So before we get into this one, I am a massive skeptic sometimes, but also very easy to persuade to believe. As long as there's evidence in place, then this is what I always try and get at. If there's evidence in place, we can all get our heads around the weirdest topics. And that's exactly where I am. Now, there's some things like the Nessie episode that we've already done where, no, there's just no way that that could happen. This one, on the other hand, is one that could certainly be true. So while we get my beliefs out of the way, while we get the reasoning behind this video out of the way, let's get into some information about Bigfoot himself. The abominable snowman, Yetis, Sasquatch, whatever you know him as, we are getting into him. So, if you've never heard of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or any of the names that I've just mentioned, just quickly, have you been living under a rock? Because there's been lots and lots and lots of fake photographic evidence and also lots of scientific evidence that has been put forward with this. And Sasquatch, as it's most commonly referred to, or as Bigfoot, has been around for quite some time, depending on who you listen to and depending on which myth you listen to. So the British explorer David Thompson is sometimes credited with the first discovery in 1811 of a set of Sasquatch footprints. Now that was the first recorded, and it depends on who you listen to. Obviously, there's different sources, but David Thompson, a British explorer, had found a set of footprints in 1811. That's quite difficult for me to fathom that long ago. But there's allegedly been hundreds of prints have been seen since this one, like hundreds of sets of prints. Now, I'm not going to go into it just yet because obviously it doesn't fit into the evidence side of it. But there has been so many sets of prints found, and also so many sets of prints debunked. So that's not necessarily something that we can call an evidence point, but he's credited with the first discovery. Visual sightings and alleged photographs and filmings, notably the Roger Patterson at Bluff Creek, California in 1967. So if you've never seen it, obviously one of the biggest sort of damning evidence, very similar to the Loch Ness Monster pictures and heads poking out of the water, was this video footage. Now, if I can find it, I'll put it on the screen. If I can't, I'm just going to walk you through it anyway. So, Roger Patterson was walking across Bluff Creek. He got his camera out and he's seen what could be described as roughly about a 7-foot hominid. So, walking bipedal, walking on two legs across the creek, quite a distance away from him, and it was sort of the easiest way to explain it is he looked a bit like Chewbacca. And this is where the first bit of damning evidence comes against it, because obviously we do know that one was a hoax. It wasn't it wasn't a true sighting. But the intrigue of it was, although they'd been spoke about throughout myth and legend throughout the years to be this kind of bipedal 6.5 foot, 7.5 foot kind of beast lurching around the woods, this was one of the first times that it had been seen on camera walking around, and obviously, like I said, it's been debunked a long time ago. It was a guy in a suit, Now, that doesn't go to disprove the myth. That just means that Roger Patterson had a degree in filmography or something along those lines. It just felt like he needed to do it. But that was a big taking off point. 1967 was a massive myth taking off point for the cultural side of it, for pop culture to pick up on this thing. Now, years gone by, it's always been spoke about. It's always been seen in legend. It's always been around. Like I said, 1811 was the first time that they've seen footprints. Now, unfortunately, I haven't seen the footprints from 1811, but they have been around for a long time. Now, although I haven't seen the photo evidence of the 1811, I do have a little bit of a journal excerpt that comes from Thompson's journal itself. On January the 7th, 1811, continuing our journey in the afternoon, we came on the tracks of a large animal. The snow was about 6 inches deep on the ice. I measured it. 4 large toes, each of 4 inches in length, to each a short claw. The ball of the foot sunk 3 inches lower than the toes. The hinder part of the foot did not mark well. The length 14 inches by 8 inches in breadth, walking from north to south, and having passed about 6 hours. We were in no humour to follow him. The men and Indians would have it to be a young mammoth. So they thought it was a mammoth. That's even crazier. And I held it to be tracks of a large, old, grizzled bear. Yet the shortness of the nails, the ball of the foot, and its great size was not that of a bear. Otherwise, that of a very large, old bear. His claws worn away. This the Indians would not allow. So obviously, going from that, the Indians would not allow the ideology of this being a giant bear. Now, one of the things that sort of strikes me about this, and when he's describing the footprint, is obviously the ball of the foot. Now, if you know anything about anatomy or the way that anyone walks, if you walk bipedal, then you walk on the balls of your feet. You sink the balls of your feet in to steady and then push away with your toes, and that's the way that people walk. For him to explain the way that this was done, this footprint was actually imprinted into the snow, that sort of gives credence to the idea that this thing is walking on 2 legs. For me, it could have been walking on 4. They could have been mistracing the tracks. But if he's got some native Indians with him, then surely they would know. Surely they would know if this was a 4-foot or a 2-foot. But the Indians wouldn't allow it. So we do know that there is something out there, whether that be from old stories or even found footage or anything along those lines. We do know that something is out there. Now, my big thing with all of this is we've seen so many hoaxes, and we've seen that Nessie is a great episode to hark back to, because like I said, the ecosystem that Nessie is in could not sustain something of that size. Now, where has Bigfoot been spotted? That's what you have to think. Where has he been spotted? He gets spotted in woods. He gets spotted in woodland. He gets spotted in vast acres of wood. He gets spotted in places where these ecosystems could sustain something of this size. Not only that, a lot of these places are uncharted. They have spots and places that are uncharted. So what's not to say that there is some giant hominid beast walking around, living its life, and just being there. That's kind of one of the things that really sticks in my head with this, because the places that it gets spotted are able to be a sustaining habitat for something of this size. Now, if that's 6.5 foot, that's 7 foot, it doesn't make no difference. This is quite a few £100 worth of beast, and that beast is able to sustain, and that's what really grasps my non-skeptical brain. The idea that this hominid beast can be spotted around. Now, while looking through all of the evidence and things like that, that's one thing that my mind takes away from it, where it has been spotted. Now, campers, hunters, and a lot of native people who live in the woods of Alaska and places like that, the redwoods and things like that, they're the ones that are spotting this beast. Now, my problem with it is obviously they're only seeing it in glancing, or they're able to get small fur samples or even stool samples or anything like that. I'm going to move on to that bit very, very shortly. I don't want to concentrate too much on the samples that are being taken from these creatures, but we are seeing the people in these areas spotting them, and it becomes a point where obviously when it comes down to Nessie, the water not accessible, we've never seen a dead body, we've never seen anything like that, and we could say the same thing about Bigfoot, but the difference is, in these woodlands, in these giant redwood woodlands, we can obviously say, without sounding like absolute idiots, that something could sustain. Now, when we come down to sustaining, obviously it needs multiple things. It needs somewhere to nest or to sleep. It needs somewhere to live. It needs somewhere to eat. Now, there is plenty of prey. There is plenty of food around it, so it can sustain the food side. It's not only that, there's multiple animals in there if it was a hunter, so it can hunt. There's water. There's everything that a large beast would need, and that's very similar to big cats in Britain. The ecosystems can sustain that because we have cattle and we have sheep and we have moorlands and we have ample space. And that's another thing. With it being ample space, there can be breeding pairs. There can be multiple of these Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yetis, whatever you want to call them. There can be multiples. And do you know what? The space in between all of these woods and their vast size, Canada and places like that have sprawling woodlands that could sustain something of this size. Not only sustain it, but keep it from being spotted. Now, the difference with this and Nessie is, if Sasquatch is a meat eater, if it's a carnivore, then one of the damning evidences of a dead body or something like that could be wiped from the equation. Because we've seen cannibalism throughout the animal kingdom, so what's not to say that something of this size is not just going to grab hold of its dead and eat it? We don't know, obviously, the caring pattern. We know that some animals do have caring sides and emotional sides. Elephants mourn their dead. But what's not to say these are complete and utter wild beasts who are going to take on their dead, and it is a free meal. We have seen primates that will kill each other and not even think twice about it, and they are incredibly intelligent creatures. So what's not to say that they are bringing the dead bodies back with them? Now, if these are living in small pods, that one beast is enough to sustain a small family. Now, I could go on this rabbit hole for a long, long time, and I could dive down this rabbit hole forever, because, to be fair, the evidence put towards Bigfoot and Bigfoot's existence is solid, to a certain degree. Now, the scientific facts and everything else that goes along with Bigfoot is something basically unheard of. We know that the Loch Ness is skimmed by sonar, not necessarily to find Nessie, but for scientific. It is purposely dredged and also sonared to find out the ecosystem. It is to find out all these other things. Now, what happens with something of complete myth? What happens with something like this? Normally, the scientific bodies would just poo-poo it. We'd get the conservationists who would go in and have a look. But what happens when scientists get involved in mythology? Now, before we get into the scientific facts and the evidence that has been found, we have to go down the route of what is science and how science works. And this is not going to be a science lesson or anything like that. Basically, don't forget, scientists of past gone by do not set out to disprove something. They experiment, they try and prove, and anything that's found on the way through, whether that be disproven or any other manner of evidence that is found from the experiment, they are setting out to prove something. Now, one thing that Sasquatch and Yetis and abominable snowmen and Bigfoots and everything had working in their power was we had a guy called Professor Brian Sykes. Now, Professor Brian Sykes was a leading geneticist who stuck his neck out on the line and was able to get hold of 30 of the most credible specimens that he could grab hold of. Now, one of the things that he did is these 30 specimens, they came from the Himalayas, they came from Everest to Siberia, they came from America's deep forest, they come from the Pacific Northwest, they come from all around, and he got 30 of the most credible. Now, these were skin samples, these were fur samples, these were stool samples, and multiple other things. And whatever he seen as credible, he was then going to test. Now, quote me if I'm wrong, but Brian Sykes was also the guy who worked on Dolly the sheep, so he had some credence, he had some following, and he also had some backlash from doing this because he stuck his neck out on the line. He did come out and say that he is a scientist and science should ever be progressing. But he took these samples. He didn't take them from the cockamamie people who were standing there saying that they'd shot a Bigfoot and kept the carcass in a freezer at home or anything like that. They were gathered in hermetically sealed cases and was preserved to the best of their abilities. Now, below the video itself in the description box, there is a link to the royalsocietypublishing.org, which is actually his study that he did. Now, his conclusions were controversial, to say the least. Now, I'm going to leave you to read that at your leisure, but his findings were something incredibly controversial. Now, out of some of them, there was, don't get me wrong, like I said, he's a true scientist, a true geneticist, and basically did what he was supposed to do. He genetically sequenced these specimens. Now, out of them, he did match the vast majority. I think barring 2, he matched the rest, and they were everything ranging from a dog, brown bear, a polar bear, and also he found some hybrids in there that were 2 different bear species that were put together. Now, these aren't just the interesting bits. These aren't the interesting bits, but obviously he did find a new breed of bear. But there were 2. There were 2 that could not be matched. Now, this is not because the DNA had dematerialized or damaged over time. These could not be matched with the genetic code of anything living on this planet. Now that, to me, is fundamental proof that something could be out there, because if it's not able to match it, then what is it matching to? Now this could be anything. It could be a species of bear that we don't know about. It could be a species of dog or even lion or anything along those lines, but they weren't able to be matched with the database that he was using. Now, I, for one, with this, when I first found out that someone was going to be doing some actual sort of real scientific studies on the existence of a Bigfoot, then your mind obviously races to it's going to be disproven, right? The skeptical side of me just thought it's going to be disproven, and I was expecting all samples to come back as just nothing, just matched to bear and raccoon and all those kind of things. But obviously to have 2, now I'd have been happy with 1. Now, the exception of these 2 samples, none of the submitted and analysed hair samples returned a sequence that could not be matched, with an extant mammalian species often domesticate. While it is important to bear in mind that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and this survey cannot refute the existence of anomalous primates, neither has it found any evidence in support. So obviously that's him covering his own back. This is science. It's not proven and it's not disproven, which means it's there. Something is there. And that's what really blew my mind with all of this. The idea that something could be out there. The idea that something could be walking our woods. Now, obviously, we've seen so much false evidence that goes around that to see this was really sort of mind-blowing. We've seen so many hoaxes. We've seen so many hoax knocking sounds. That's one of the big pieces of, I'm doing air quotes here, but you can't see it. The big pieces of evidence is people saying that knocking sounds are coming from the woods. Now, communication and things like that is a whole different discussion, because I don't think that Bigfoot would communicate with its other Bigfoots using tree knocks. Now, that to me is indicative of a primate that's using tools, and we don't actually know the intelligence level, if any, if there are anything around. So I always count that as false evidence. There would be growls and low-pitched howls and maybe grunts. If we're talking a hominid, if we're talking a primate, then we wouldn't be looking at tree knocks. But with it all being false evidence, we've seen so much of it. And when we've seen so much of it, it's very easy to kind of get it in your head that something like this couldn't be real. But the idea that a true geneticist has gone out there and done some actual testing and done some actual science to try and find out if this is real is absolutely a step forward in cryptozoology. Now, he he got blasted for it, obviously. People were calling him crazy for going out there and doing it, but he stuck his neck out online. He was a scientist, and that's all I can say about him. Now, over the years, I'm sure we're going to see more and more evidence, and eventually, one way or another, we will prove or disprove the existence of these big, bipedal, hominid, friendly or non-friendly creatures. But until then, we only have our imagination. I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been a little bit of a rambly one again. But the whole idea of Bigfoot and Yeti is something that I'm going to go out there on a limb and say it's something that I believe in. It's somewhere where I am. If you know of any proof, then please let me know down in the comments. If you know of anything that's been put out there to actually prove it, and maybe it may be some pictures, it may be a Reddit thread, it could be anything, but please let me know. Anyway, until the next time, you may hear some trees rustling in the wind. You may hear some sticks breaking at your feet. But all you have to do is never be afraid of what's behind you.